macros for endurance. What we're going to run through basically a top-down, bottom-up approach, which is an approach that I always like to take. So top-down, I like to think of as, hey, what do we actually want to achieve in terms of increasing, volume of miles that we're doing, aerobic capacity, and then the bottom up is basically, okay, what has to change in our physiology to achieve that? So that's the way that I like to look at it. So we'll dive into that. We're then going to look at the energy cost of endurance exercise, just because that is something that is often underestimated massively. Then we're going to dive into macros, periodizing based on, your activity level, what kind of stage of training you're at. So Marion, as you were saying, that is pronounced Marion, right?
Yeah, call me Mai, like my house or my car.
Cool, Mai. So Mai, as you were sort of saying there, in terms of the work, the training that you're doing at the minute, there's no race on the horizon or anything like that. So we're going to talk a bit about, okay, cool, how do your macros change based on that kind of a phase versus the closer you get to competition, and the benefits that you can kind of get from that. And then we're going to look at putting it all together. So we're going to jump on one of the strength plans from the hub, but we're going to look at how to tweak it so that strength is not the focus, endurance is the focus, on what to kind of use for each of those phases. So keeping the big picture in mind, this is kind of the first sort of top-down approach that we want to look at. So we want to look at what we want to achieve. And so if you are moving from strength, functional fitness into endurance work, something that you're probably going to want to improve on is your aerobic capacity. So we need to think about, okay, cool, that's what we want to look at. How do we make the physiological changes we need to achieve that? How do we make that from a training point of view? And then how do we make that from a nutrition point of view? And making sure that they marry each other. Something that I see quite a lot of times in endurance training, especially in nutrition, especially people have come from sort of CrossFit or strength, they don't necessarily change their nutrition to suit the training. And so as you'll probably see when we get to protein, they might be consuming ridiculous amounts of protein, which ace for muscle protein synthesis and strength and all that sort of stuff. But for endurance, you're probably being a little bit inefficient with that, and you've kind of got room to improve on there with that. So it's the idea of, okay, these are the changes we want to make. We know that the training is going to do this, but what about our nutrition? So I'm just going to bring up one of my favorite flow charts, which is a bit overwhelming, a bit kind of in your face there, but it's basically kind of a little overview of the physiological changes and some nutrition interventions that can impact your performance. So obviously we're talking endurance, we're going to be looking more at this side, the right-hand side of this flowchart. So we're going to focus on kind of aerobic power and capacity and performance. And we know that obviously endurance running economy is going to be a big part of that. So, some people might think of body composition when they think of that. And if you've got excess fat, then, hey, that's going to be reduced. So you'll probably want to periodize your nutrition to go through a bit of a fat loss phase and all that sort of stuff. What we're going to think about for the rest of this talk is we're going to assume that your body comp is where you want it to be, in terms of that economy. You're not necessarily going through a fat loss phase. You're at a good spot, and it's just a case of tweaking it to maintain your weight, maintain your physique, but make these changes. So make these changes that'll improve VO2 max, that'll improve that lactate threshold. And those changes from the physiological point of view come from this kind of little bit down here. So that distribution of power and energy, that can be to do with the muscle mass that you have, not excessive amounts. The aerobic enzyme development, we'll chat a bit about kind of the role in periodizing your fats and your carbs to improve the efficiency there, to increase some mitochondria, and VO2 max. Obviously, you've got the cardiac output, and then hemoglobin. And another factor of this is going to be just substrate availability. So just how much fuel does your body have to be able to run a marathon, that kind of thing. If you don't have enough fuel there, you're not going to sort of finish it. So we're going to keep these in mind in terms of those physiological adaptations that we want to make, and how to marry it. So energy balance and energy costs. This is one that I wanted to touch on first because, believe it or not, energy balance is still important. And this is something that, is hammered home from all sides of the coin. I'm not a big fan of people that just shout calorie deficit and calories in, calories out, because they don't take into account the context of the situation. But lo and behold, when training for endurance, energy balance is still important. As we sort of said there, in that running economy phase, if you want to reduce fat mass, then you're going to need to be in a calorie deficit for sure. If you want to perform at your best, you're going to want to have a relatively high energy availability, and the energy cost of endurance exercise is higher than most people think. And we'll have a look at a little graph there in a bit, just to kind of hammer that point home. But we want to avoid REDS. So that's something that I mentioned with regards to this thing, energy availability. So REDS is relative energy deficiency in sport. And it's commonly kind of seen or commonly shows when people have REDS in women is this kind of female athlete triad, where you lose your menstrual cycle, symptoms of disordered eating are around there. And there's like a loss of bone function as well, or bone health is diminished. But it's not just kind of women that it affects. And there's a lot of research now into REDS, how that shows itself and the other underlying symptoms in the whole athletic population, as opposed to just women in that female athlete triad. And basically it occurs when your energy intake is much less than your energy expenditure for obviously the size that you are. And it can manifest itself in depression, reduced performance, all of this sort of stuff. And it's basically worth keeping in mind that, hey, a 1 hour sort of squat session or CrossFit session might be energetically less intense than a 1 hour run or 1 hour bike. Even if kind of your heart rate doesn't get jacked up as high, it might be raised for longer. And so that energy cost is still going to be higher. And so just to kind of hammer that home, we've got a little graph here, which was taken from this systematic review looking at energy intake of endurance athletes. What they found in this prep phase and in this competition phase was basically that the energy intake, so the energy intake here is the black bit, there's a tiny little key there, I apologize for the size of it, and the energy expenditure is, this all-encompassing white part on the graph. And as you can see, kind of across all of these in males and females, even in the prep phase, so when their intensity isn't that big, when their volume isn't that big, they're still kind of taking in less than they're expending. And males, expending more than sort of 4,000 calories here, females around that kind of 4,000 mark in that prep phase. And then in the competition phase, this is when you've got people, prepping to run marathons and that kind of thing. The energy expenditure is still up here at 10,000 calories per day, and their intake is still down here, which is significantly less than what they're expending, obviously. So there you've got that danger of that energy deficiency, that drop in performance. So the first point is just, hey, energy balance still matters. You might be expending a bit more energy than before if you move into endurance training, and you shouldn't underestimate that at all. And we're obviously going to dive into the templates and look at how to kind of, tweak those to get the most out of that, depending on your training as well. But where should this energy come from? And with endurance training, I'm a big fan of making stuff efficient, ultimately getting the most bang for your buck from the food that you're taking in and the macros, because this is all about macros for endurance. And we haven't even talked about a macro yet. So what we're going to do first is we're going to talk about everybody's favorite macro to start with, and that is going to be protein. So protein, we're going to look at basically, do you need as much from an endurance side of things? And to kind of illustrate this, what I've got is a photo of this man, Nick Bear. I don't know if any people are fans of Nick Bear. He's a YouTube fitness dude. I used to love him when I was at university because he was super jacked, like on the left. And he's basically a former bodybuilder, former military guy. And then as he grew up, as kind of you see a lot of people do, he decided to get into endurance training. And so this is kind of just a nice little picture to illustrate the difference in physique and the difference in kind of like the physiological changes that we want. So obviously when he's bodybuilding, he wants to have as much muscle mass as possible. He wants muscle protein synthesis to be nice and high. And so he was probably eating around 2 grams of protein per kilo per day. These tend to be kind of the recommendations for most people on kind of the amount of protein that you want to eat to maximize muscle protein synthesis. Any more than that, and your body is still kind of put it to use, but this tends to be sort of the most sort of efficient way there. On this other one, he obviously doesn't want to maximize his muscle protein synthesis. He doesn't want to build any excess muscle because he's just going to be carrying around more human being. He wants to be lean, he wants to be efficient. And so in terms of protein intake there, you kind of want as much to maintain the muscle mass that you have, so that it is being nice and efficient. And so there, your intake in terms of protein, the recommendations for that at the minute come down to about that 1.2 to 1.6 grams per kilo per day. It's quite nice to have that sort of window there as well, because I know that if you're in the functional fitness world or the strength world, you're probably going to be used to eating a lot of protein. And so going from 2 grams per kilo body weight per day, so let's use 100 kilo man because it makes the maths easier, going from 200 grams per day to 120 grams per day is quite a big drop. So if you were kind of doing that transition from strength where you're eating loads and loads and loads into endurance, you could almost take a little stepwise approach, and take it down to that sort of 1.6 grams and a 160. And then that can almost kind of feed into buy-in of, okay, cool. Like I'm not losing all my gains. I'm maintaining the muscle that I have. I'm just not necessarily putting any more on, and it's benefiting my running economy. And I've then got more room to work with regards to, hey, our body's actual preferred fuel sources, because the body will use protein as a fuel if it doesn't have carbs or fats available. But we ideally want to use protein, obviously, for this muscle growth and repair, maintaining this. So in that kind of dialing back a little bit, you open the window for more carbs and fats, which is what we're going to get onto now. So we're going to start off with carbs. And are they still king ultimately? Because for a long period of time, carbs have always been said as like, hey, you need to eat a load of carbs to perform at your best. You need to eat loads of carbs to perform at your best. And with regards to carbs still being king, the answer is yes and no, but probably more yes. So just to kind of expand on that, we know from a load of stuff in the research that the limiting factor, that one of the main limiting factors for performance on kind of like a race day for endurance race is going to be the amount of glycogen, so the amount of stored carb that you have available to you. If you don't have a lot of stored carbohydrate available to you, you're going to bonk, basically. That's kind of like widely regarded as a big factor in performance, is this carb availability. But on the flip side, there's also a lot of kind of research looking into this idea of training on reduced carbs and then competing on increased carbs. And the idea there is this concept of metabolic flexibility, which we're going to dive into when we get to fats. But it's essentially this concept of your body being more efficient at using different types of fuel for what it needs. So for example, fats, we need oxygen to be able to break down fats and use them as a fuel. And so at low intensities, when we can pull in plenty of oxygen, if you can train your body to use fats more efficiently, then if you think of a fuel tank, you've got more carbs stored for when you need the carbs, right? For that sort of high intensity stuff. So with regards to carbs still being king, it's a big yes and no. Carbs are very important with regards to endurance training, but manipulating the amount of carb you eat depending on the training that you're doing in that training phase could be really, really beneficial, which we're going to get into after we've sort of covered fats as well. So just to kind of reiterate how carbs are so widely regarded currently, these are kind of the recommendations that are currently given for endurance athletes, or just athletes from a carb point of view. So if you're in a light training phase, low intensity, skill based, the recommendations are 3 to 5 grams per kilo body weight per day. So for myself, I'm about 75 kilos. That's like 75 times 3. Oh, now you're asking. We'll go 75 times 5. That's about that kind of 350 to 400 grams of carbs a day, which is a significant amount of carbohydrates. And that's just for kind of this low intensity light stuff. So this is for optimal kind of carb recommendations. And obviously there, as you go up, so moderate, you've got an hour endurance training per day, 5 to 7. high, so 1 to 3 hours of endurance training per day. This is, if you're going for like 100-mile weeks, that kind of stuff, then 6 to 10 grams. And then very high, this will be for your ultra endurance athletes. You even get to kind of 8 to 12 grams per day. And so these recommendations have come from 3 guys in the nutrition world, John Hawley, Louise Burke, and Aski Ukendrup, and they're big names in nutrition. And I was thinking, as I was writing this, hey, 3 big names in nutrition. I was trying to link them to 3 famous people to give you guys like an idea as to how well regarded they are, but all I could come up with was the Jonas Brothers, which is ridiculous. So I called them the Jonas Brothers of nutrition. But much like the Jonas Brothers, they live in a totally different world to us. And so what I kind of wanted to hammer home here was that optimal does not mean practical. So, for example, as I've sort of said in that light, low intensity skill-based stuff, if I was to eat 5 grams of carbs per kilo body weight per day, I'd be eating about 350 to 400 grams of carbs. And if I'm eating that and I'm eating that 1.6 grams of protein, then, hey, my energy intake is climbing. So that will have a knock-on effect in that total energy balance. And hey, I'm still trying to make room for fats. So optimal does not mean practical, but this slide is basically there to sort of hammer home this idea of carbs are beneficial. When you're in competition phase, you're probably going to be wanting more carbs, and we've got some recommendations for that in a bit. But that does not mean practical. So yeah, just kind of take these with a pinch of salt. Use it as kind of a concept of, okay, cool. If I'm going through a very high training phase, then yeah, I'm going to need more carbs than if I was in a moderate training phase. But am I going to be able to consume 8 grams of carb per kilo per day? Probably not. It's just that kind of concept that we're attacking. Awesome. Fats, where do fats come in? So we've probably all seen this graph before. It's one that's on a couple of PH presentations that we've done before, and it's I think it's done on the level 1 as well, maybe not. But this is basically a graph that's showing the contribution of total energy, so substrate, compared with exercise intensity. And so what it's showing is that kind of thing that I mentioned earlier, whereby you've got fats being used at low intensities and carbs at high intensities. Now, it's important to note that this is kind of like a unrealistic graph. It's going to be much more kind of a bit of this, a bit of that. And a lot of people may be more carb dependent than fat dependent. But the idea behind this is that fuel tank analogy that I gave before. So I like to think of the body as having almost 2 fuel tanks in this sense. And it's important to say, this is quite a simplified version. But let's say you've got a fat fuel tank and you've got a carb fuel tank. Fats can be used at low intensities, but a lot of people don't. A lot of people kind of carb dependent because the body, hey, it's going to use what you give it. If you put petrol in a car, it's going to use petrol. So, if we give our body carbs, it's going to use carbs, even at those low intensities. So for most people, what kind of happens is these fuel tanks come down at about the same rate. And then when you get to that higher intensity stuff where, hey, I really need to use carbs, I can't use fats anymore, you've only got half a tank left. So the idea here with fats is if we can kind of train our bodies to use fats more efficiently at low intensities, then what we can do with these fuel tanks is bring that fat one down and then, okay, cool, we need to use carbs now, but we've got a full tank ready to go. So you can spare that glycogen to use when you need it. This is the idea behind fats. And the way that you can do this is periodize based on your training phase and then based on kind of day-to-day training as well, which we will show you how to do on the templates when we get there. But it's this kind of concept of for example, if you are in that kind of prep phase, you're not in a competition phase, your overall fat intake is probably going to be a bit higher than it would be if you're in the comp phase. Because if we even fall back to the carb recommendations there, like even if you're in that carbs, you're in that 3 to 5 grams, that fat intake can come up. And what you can do is you can kind of look around training, maybe incorporate some fasted training into your training to improve that fat oxidation as well and run through that. So yeah, that's kind of where fats come in. So this idea of being metabolically flexible, using fats when you can at low intensities so that you spare carbs for when you have to. It's that kind of idea of can and have to, because, we can't use those fats at high intensities because we're not pulling enough oxygen in. So yeah, there we go, utilizing carbs and fats effectively at different intensities. preserving that muscle glycogen for more intense work, improving recovery capacity, better body composition control, overall health will improve. There's this kind of concept of insulin sensitivity being improved if you're more metabolically flexible as well, which obviously has that kind of knock-on effect into overall health. But yeah, the key for nutrition and improving your engine is manipulation of carbs, fats, and calories, and fueling for the work required. So let's have a look at that and how to sort of periodize it based on training. So this is a fantastic graph. It's from the same paper where we saw the energy intake, energy expenditure. And what it's sort of showing here is you've got the phases of training and then intensity and volume. So intensity of exercise and then volume in terms of kilometers per week that these athletes would do. And you've got these phases. So preparation, early phase, late phase, then competition, pre-competitive, and then competitive. So you kind of see that, hey, in the early prep phase, intensity is low, volume's lowish. And so this is kind of that point where if you move back to the carb table or the fat table, the carb ratio and the fat ratio, if we think about it, it's going to be more fats to carbs and kind of periodizing day to day. So if you're training one day, resting the next day, you're going to have a bit more carbs on that training day. You're going to have a bit less carbs on the other day. And so the fats are going to come up on there and looking at like that. So as well as the big picture of, okay, this is my prep phase, this is my competition phase. So I'm going to up carbs. You can look about it day to day as well. And I know there's kind of I'm having a lot of kind of information and concepts at you. So we simplify it and we're going to run through how to do it on the templates as well. But there we go. So training changes, so should nutrition. As intensity and volume increases, carb intake should probably increase. That fat intake can come down. That substrate availability is still going to be nice and high. And then you've kind of got the benefit of the adaptation from being metabolically flexibility and using fats in that early stage. It's kind of this idea of adaptation and optimization. You want to kind of adapt to using fats at the early stages and then optimize giving your body the carbs in those competition phases so that you can go absolutely flying. And so if there's no kind of competition on the horizon, then it's a case of, okay, cool, we'll go for like a long early phase and then maybe, test yourself every now and then with some carbs and seeing how that goes. If your training intensity is always nice and high, you're likely to be wanting to have a bit more carbohydrate as well. So we've got some general recce's here, general recommendations. So in that early training prep phase, you want to choose lean gains on the template, and we're going to run through this. But going on to the strength template, choosing lean gains, set protein to roughly 1.6 to 2 grams per kilo body weight. Then set carbs, it's going to be around 40%. And these are just going to be baselines, so you can tweak these afterwards as well. And then set fats at around that 35%. So that's going to be the early training and the prep phase. So let's actually have a look at that now. So I've got a copy of the hub here. So for those of you guys that don't know, once you're on the hub to get to the nutrition plans, it's just going to be on nutrition plans. And then what I've done here is I've gone on strength advanced. And then just making a copy of the template. And so here I've got a copy of that template. And what I've done is I've basically put in my metrics. So this is me, male, 24, 169 centimeters, about 73 kilos. Put in my NEAT as normal, so 6,000, 10,000 steps, then lean gains being the goal for this endurance. And then what I've done is I've put in my training days per week, which at the minute is going to be 6, but if you're kind of doing strength and endurance and some concurrent training, then obviously you can change this, put in 5 plus regular doubles. But yeah, so what I'll do here is I'll look back at, okay, cool. So I'm in this early phase of my training. So protein wants to be roughly 1.6 to 2 grams per kilo body weight. I know that 2 grams is going to be about 150. So, hey, maybe it needs to be a little bit less than that. So we'll go, let's go 23. So about 140 grams. Perfect. And then carbs I've set at 40% and then fats 35. But because this is a little bit lower in the 23%, then what I can do, because we're in this early phase, is, okay, I'll take that fats up and I'll take it to 37. So this would be kind of my early prep phase. That's the macros that I'm going to attack. And then what I'm going to think about as well day to day is, you know, whether on my training plan, if I'm still doing CrossFit, which I am. So me at the minute, what I'm doing, the way I've structured is I've got 3 kind of strength CrossFit days and then 3 endurance days. And the way that I'm attacking that from a day-to-day periodization point of view as well, is my carbs, I take up a little bit on my CrossFit days, and I take my fats down on the CrossFit days. And so the best way to kind of do that with the plans that we've got here is ultimately use the templates. So for me, I normally train in the evening when I'm doing my CrossFit, and so I will follow the evening training. So the difference that we've got here, obviously, is we've got 2 big training meals, which, as we know, have more carbs in, less fats, and it sandwiches that training. Then on my endurance days, I've actually been going with the rest day meal structure. So I've got 1 less training meal, just the 1 kind of training meal there, which means that most of my meals are going to be a little bit lower in carbs, a little bit higher in fat than on those training days. And that's kind of the way that you can use still these same calories and macros that you've got set, but just tweak the structure and use this template to get the most out of it week to week, as well as that longer phase of training. Cool. So what we can do as well is we've got the comp phase. And in the comp phase, that protein intake is going to probably want to come down a little bit. So we're still going to keep it at lean gains. Protein is going to come down to roughly 1.2 to 1.6 grams per kilo body weight. Carbs are going to come up to sort of about 50%, and then fats are going to come back down. So we're using that concept of, okay, intensity is going to come up, so carbs are going to come up, fats are going to come down. This is more the optimization as opposed to the adaptation. And so what I would do here on this template is I go back to macro calculator, and the targets that I'd use are actually going to be the weeks 5 and 6. And all I'm going to do is tweak these, because we know that, hey, energy expenditure might be a little bit higher. And if your routine changes dramatically, if you add in a few more sessions, then definitely head to the training days and change that and tweak that. But for me, I'm going to keep it about the same. Just the volume, the intensity of the sessions I'm doing is going to go up. So I'm going to go with the weeks 5 and 6 targets, which are a little higher in calories. I'm going to take my protein down to between that 1.2, 1.6 grams per kilo body weight. Take my carbs up, so they've increased there by about 80 grams, and then fats down as well. And what you can do here as well, is play it a little by ear as well. If we sort of think and look at these, if I look at 320 grams and think back to that carb recommendations, it's around and about, it's a little bit lower than that 5 to 7 grams per kilo body weight that we had on that table before. So if I think, hey, yeah, I can get this in and it's easy, then what you can do is you can almost take it up a little bit more by typing it in and be like, yeah, I'm going to go for a bit more carbs. I'm going to take my fats down even more because I am able to do that. That is now sort of practical for me, but it's important to kind of start with just the concepts, figure out if it's practical. So like if there was absolutely no way that I was getting 350 grams of carbs in a day immediately, then it'd be that kind of stepwise approach of, okay, I'll gradually increase it as the fats come down, to make way for that. So that's how I'd use the template there. So the lean gains, set protein roughly 1.6 to 2 grams per kilo body weight. 1.2 to 1.6 for the comp phase, then carbs at 50, fats at 30%, and obviously tweak based on your training intensity as well. Awesome, guys. So key take homes there. What we'll do as well is we'll make sure that, this is easy to find. This video is going to be on the hub as well, so you can turn back and you can just skip to this bit where we sort of run through the template to get you guys set up, because that'll be probably the easiest thing in terms of you. And that's, although we've dived a bit into the physiology, the most kind of beneficial bit is going to be this, right? The actual practical take homes of, okay, cool. How do I set up my macros? Awesome. So more take homes just to kind of stay on it. Don't underestimate the energy cost of endurance. Be efficient with your calories. So that means taking that protein down to probably a bit less than it's currently at if you've been doing strength stuff, and then periodize based on goals and phase. So changing based on your training as well. Awesome, guys. Any questions?
Just want to dive in there to say before we kind of open it up is like absolutely superb stuff in terms of like I said, a little bit of the science behind it. Hopefully that's kind of giving you an idea, like, guys, feel free to answer any questions. We can bring up the template and talk about adjusting it. But the key thing is to take where you are at the moment. Like we had a little bit of chat just before we kind of come on here, didn't we? About, okay, some of you have got competitions coming up, triathlons, others are maybe increasing the intensity or volume that you're doing in lockdown, whereas others are kind of maybe just more in a prep phase. So hopefully this gives you a little bit of kind of guidance in terms of kind of where to plot yourself, and then how to, like say, make some adjustments using the templates. Obviously these are templates, so they need to be adjusted and personalized. So hopefully that kind of gives you a bit of an understanding of how to do that. Like I say, anyone got any questions about kind of maybe where, be really kind of specific or personal about where to kind of set your protein or carbs, or let us know if you kind of found that useful, and let us know, guys. No one.
Hi guys.
Good.
Sorry, go on.
Can you hear me? I'm like in the kitchen.
Yep.
If you had an athlete that was doing endurance and they did want to go on a cut, would you recommend a drop in carbs or fats, and why would you recommend more likely one of those?
I would say that you're basically almost adding another phase in there, right? So fat loss phase to improve that sort of running economy. I'd say in that case, when you're kind of periodizing with regards to priorities, what works best for them in terms of losing fat, and then almost set a timeline out and be like, okay, here's the race. We're going to have you at the sort of body composition that you want to be X amount of months before that, and we're going to do it in the way that works best for you ultimately. So, maybe using the fat loss and people respond differently to sort of high carb, high fat, and you can even use a bit of a both throughout the week sort of thing. But then once they're at that phase, at that weight, then maybe attacking the sort of adaptive phase, and then moving on to the competition phase and almost adding in that extra little step. Liam, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, mate. I think, Chloe, what you can do is potentially keep it very much like the early phase. So, Luke, bring up the template for me. Yep. If you bring it up like a comp, because if you bring it up like a comp or kind of early phase, because you shouldn't be cutting, definitely leaning around the competition or doing anything like that. And exactly that, I would just bring them into a gradual or a moderate deficit, but keep the percentages similar to kind of what, like you would set up, making sure that protein's slightly higher, maybe up at the 1.6, maybe even kind of like, 1.8, depending on what they're doing. But keep the splits relatively the same, but I would just adjust the overall calories to bring them into a slightly deficit, but make sure that it's away from competition time, away from a hard training block. And like Luke said, that's almost a kind of an extra phase, or probably I would put them into it when they're in their periodization in a pre. So like, making sure that there is, before they kind of get into some kind of real kind of, deep training or around competition. So adjust calories, maybe look at, like, say, keeping protein on the higher end, and then just adjusting based on personal preference, because we know that calories are king in terms of change body composition. So, that's what I would suggest in terms of setting it up. That kind of makes sense. Then, going back into kind of more of a lean gains approach, once they get close to their kind of target body weight.
Yeah, I think with that as well, as Liam sort of said, to reiterate the protein point, obviously when you're looking to lose mass, we know that high protein is going to be beneficial in terms of the leanness that we want to maintain. And so if you're thinking about that, 1.6 grams, maybe again, even taking that higher, but with kind of the calories that you have left in the carbs and fats, going for that adaptation. But probably if you had, me and Liam, who are pretty similar in terms of body type, and one of us wanted to lose weight, the other one wanted to maintain, our carb and fat ratio would probably be the same, but whoever wants to lose weight would probably take that protein up a little bit higher, and their protein requirements probably be a little bit more, with that overall calorie obviously less.
Thank you.
No worry.
John, did you have a question?
That kind of answers my question, really. I'm currently in the fat loss stage, and I'm kind of learning all about the macros thing, because it's completely new concept to me, but I'm chugging out like 90, 100 miles a week on my indoor trainer, which I'm kind of really embracing and really enjoying. So it is bringing my weight down. I guess my question is, I think you've just answered it, because I'm in that fat loss phase, and ultimately that is my initial goal. Do I increase my protein and lessen the carbs on the template to get to ultimately get to that weight loss gain? Does that make sense? Sorry.
Yeah, definitely. And I'd say, where we've kind of used these, if I go back and exit this, where we've sort of looked at this, these are just sort of recommendations. So in fat loss phase, as we've sort of said there, more protein is better in terms of retaining the lean muscle and losing fat. So it could even be a case of, hey, you don't have to stick to these by law. It could be, hey, 1.8 grams could be beneficial. And obviously there you've got a bit more window in terms of the calories that you're taking in, and the carbs could then come down. But as we sort of said with fat loss before, as Liam sort of alluded to there, the calories are king. So whichever is sort of easiest for you to stick to in terms of losing fat, awesome, go with that. But maybe, you know, have these concepts in your mind as to fueling for the work required potentially, and looking at that as well.
Great, thank you very much.
Yeah, for you, John, because you're doing some strength work as well through the week, you know, I would definitely say that keeping your protein up above, you know, looking once you enter your weight and do all of these, keeping it around, like Lou said, that 1.6 to 1.8 at the moment, I think would probably be a better recommendation to start with. And then maybe even just if you're losing weight and you're keeping going from there, then, you know, just keep on that pathway, mate. You know, because you're making progress. What we want to do is just make sure that you're then aware of slight changes, you know, like awareness of, you know, like kind of accumulative fatigue and not being able to push, or performance starts to kind of plateau a little bit, you know, and they're these the kind of clear signs that you need to maybe just kind of then bump up, you know, you go from either moderate to gradual to back into like that lean gains phase. So hope that kind of gives you a bit of clarity in terms of, you know, the next block.
That's really useful. Thanks, guys. That's really good. Thank you.
Thank you. Beautiful. Cool. Thanks, guys. So just to kind of mention as well, this is sort of the first presentation in what should be a series. So we're going to dive into actual, whereas here we've talked about competition phase, what we're going to dive into at some point is going to be actual kind of competition guidelines. So that idea of carb loading, where it changes again and you start looking at the kind of 10 grams per kilo body weight and, okay, cool, in the real world, what does that look like and how do I achieve that and that sort of stuff. And then we'll dive into some hydration and stuff like that. So if you've got any questions with regards to that, feel free to ask them as well, throw them in the form and all that sort of stuff, but they may be answered next month.
Fantastic. Cheers, Luke. Thanks so much, guys. As kind of Luke mentioned there, we've just launched the forum here, so we are going to be posting this video and a few other bits and pieces on there. And like you say, if you have any questions and you want them answered, then, you know, feel free to kind of pop some bits on there. And as we said, we're going to be hosting these regularly now. So if there are any things or topics that you want us to cover, then yeah, feel free to kind of fire us away, you know, a message, and we'll make sure to prioritize them and get, you know, some hopefully some practical stuff as well as a little bit of education science. So yeah, hope you found this useful for everyone, and have a lovely Tuesday.
Thanks, guys.